Thank you for tuning in to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. Whether you're listening during your commute, while working out, or just relaxing at home, we appreciate you. Every download, every listen, and every subscription means a lot. Up next, the 12 Kyle podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. Thank you for downloading. And thank you for subscribing to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I am your boy, 12 Kyle. Man, check this out. On this episode, what I want to talk about is performing. It's showtime. Like when the lights come on and it's time to perform. I came to this idea from my homegirl, Autumn the Aries. Check out her podcast, the Lit Life podcast. One of my favorite podcasters, one of my favorite people out here doing her thing. Autumn, we need more episodes. But she did an episode. It was easily 3 years ago. It was an episode that she did with a young lady by the name of Gray Genius. And they talked about performing. And what I did was I wrote some notes down and put it in my notes folder in my iPhone. And I was like, I'll get to this episode at some point. But, you know, if you follow me and you follow this podcast, you know that I've often said that in a lot of ways, a lot of these episodes that we end up doing, I've treated it like a singer would treat songs that they write, or a rapper would treat it like verses that he or she wrote. And that's what it was. Like, I literally wrote the notes on this one 3 years ago, and I'm just now getting around to it. But it's I think it's a great topic to talk about, because like in the episode, she was explaining about how they were feeling when it was time for them to perform or do something in front of a bunch of people. And the initial thoughts got me thinking back to our youngest child, our only daughter, Skylar. When Skylar was about 3 years old, she took tap dancing, right? And God, it's crazy to think about this memory, because it's literally was 10 years ago. But she was taking tap dance, right? And she had her first performance. Now, again, this is a bunch of 3-year-olds. So even though they rehearsed, they practiced, they went to rehearsal and everything with the other kids her age, you still don't know what kids are going to do when the lights come on and the curtains open up. And I will never forget it for as long as I live. Like I said, we're anxious. My wife and I, we're very anxious. We're sitting in the audience, and she had been practicing for what feels like months. And so when they opened up, it was her and maybe, 10 other little girls. And when they opened up the curtains, Skylar and the girls had their backs turned to the audience. And so, you just still unsure as to what's about to happen, right? And I'll never forget, the curtains open up, and then the music starts playing, and then it hits a note. And then after it hits this main note, they're to turn around and face the audience. And Skylar pauses. When the note hits, she turns around really slow, and she looks out at the crowd, and this huge smile comes across her face. And she just had this look on her face like, I got this. Like, I'm about to show y'all. And for the next, 5 or 10 minutes or however long they perform, she was incredible. And I'm not just saying this just because she's my daughter and she's my child and I love her to life. But it was crazy to me because, like, I had never seen, I know she was, she's a little girl, right? You could tell when your kids are confident about certain things. She's always been very confident and very self-aware, very sure of herself, even at a very young age. But to see her on that stage and to see other little girls kind of freeze up, but she was like literally and figuratively the star of the show. Like, all eyes were on her. and she just did her thing, and it was so amazing. And she won't remember that. But I really wanted to ask her, like, what was going through your mind? Because, like, I'm thinking that she may freeze up, she may be intimidated by the audience because she's on a stage and there's a light shining on them, and you know how it is if you've been on stage, you really can't see into the audience, but for so far. And I was blown away. She really, really, um, not only did she make me proud, because she always makes me proud, but I was blown away by how well she performed when it was showtime. And it got me to thinking, along with Autumn's podcast episode with the great genius, that, showtime. How do we perform, or how have I performed when the lights were on? And it got me to thinking just a couple of things. First, like my first memories of performing. I think my first memories of performing would be things like school plays in elementary school. Let's see. In church, Easter Sunday, doing those Easter speeches. Now, I don't know where you guys went to church, but I grew up in a black church, African Methodist Episcopal Church, aka AMEs. And every Easter, the kids would say their little Easter speeches, and those were always interesting to say the least. But yeah, those are probably my first memories of performing in front of people. To a lesser degree, playing football in the neighborhood when the little girls are watching. Oh man, I used to love that. I used to love that when you knew the little girls were watching you and watching, well, why is he scoring all of those touchdowns? Listen, I was showing out because I wanted to, just like any other little boy, you want the girls to notice you. But those are probably my first memories of performing. Like I said, performing for little girls playing football, in the neighborhood, that's probably to a lesser degree, but school plays in elementary school and Easter speeches. And Easter speeches weren't necessarily hard. They weren't easy because, one, you had to memorize your lines. You couldn't go up there with a piece of paper. You had to memorize and your Easter speech might have been, 4 bars or 2 bars. Depending on, what it was that your mom or dad picked out for you to say, or whatever Bible verse they wanted, or whatever quotation they wanted you to say. But it was always interesting. So you got your little Easter suit, and you're up there saying your little Easter speech in front of the congregation, and you always got and people clap and everything. So it was always cool. You got your kudos and your cool points for that. But those were the first performances. Probably as I got older, for me it was still in the church. Particularly as I moved up to being like a middle schooler and then getting to high school. I sang in the church choir in my church. And while I was never like a lead singer. Like I was always the guy to blend in. I could carry a tune, still can, but I don't outside of the shower. But I remember distinctly, I think I was in like 9th grade, I think. And we were singing this song called Tomorrow by the Winans, very famous gospel song. And I actually had a part in the song where I had a mini solo. And it wasn't long. It was just, like a half a bar. But the thing about it is that in that verse, I'm supposed to hit a note that's higher than the other notes. Problem is, if you're in 8th or 9th grade, your voice is still changing. So maybe one day you can hit that note, the next day you can't. And it literally went from, during rehearsals and practice, I could hit the high note with no problem. This particular Sunday, I went to hit that high note and it was not there because my voice cracked. And I remember hitting the note and I grabbed my throat because like I couldn't believe that I had just pushed it out and it didn't land. And I remember I was embarrassed because my voice literally cracked on stage. And again, it happens because, like I said, you're not, you don't know how your voice is going to sound on a day-to-day basis when like I said, when you're in the 8th or ninth grade, because again, hormones, puberty is hitting, if you will, and you just don't know. So, but yeah, tomorrow. So every time I hear tomorrow, I think about that part. I think about that time in church when my voice cracked. And what was interesting was, the little old ladies in the church, baby, you did so good, baby, you did so good. You're never gonna get booed at church for your voice cracking. So yeah, it was but it was a learning experience. I think as you get older, Showtime means different things. It could mean that you're going to put your best foot forward, or it could mean that you're going to succumb to the pressure. I was one that never really believed in pressure. Like I never really, I'm not going to say never, but it was rare for me to get, kind of stage fright or anything like that. So again, going back to Skylar, seeing her perform and then going through that, and having those memories really triggered some things for me because, you never know what's going to happen. I mean, you don't know if you're going to have your Easter speech memorized and the kid that goes in front of you kills it and has the church, standing on their feet, or you never know if the kid that goes in front of you is going to freeze up, or if you're going to stand in front of a crowd and your voice cracks. You just never know. So you always have to kind of just be prepared for whatever. For me, it was pretty simple. And I tried to keep things simple in my mind, but what you have in your mind and what actually comes out sometimes isn't the same thing. I tell you what, sit tight. We'll take a commercial break. And on the other side, I'll give you some more examples about what happens when the lights come on in this Showtime. Sit tight. This is the 12 Kyle podcast. We'll be back in just a second. Are you feeling nostalgic for the golden eras of rap and soul music? If so, tune in to the Rap Soul podcast. We are your weekly journey through the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, spotlighting the music and the hidden gems that shaped the soundtrack of our lives. From the powerful beats to the soulful melodies, we bring you the best of the past with fresh insights and stories. Rediscover the music that defined a generation. Subscribe to the Rap Soul podcast and enjoy the vibes. And just like that, we are back. Once again, it's your boy 12 Kyle. This is the 12 Kyle podcast. And we're talking about Showtime. When the lights come on, how do you perform? Do you have any memories of a certain performance that you've had where either you did your thing or you didn't? Before the break, I gave you a couple of examples when I was younger. Now, as I got a little bit older, things definitely changed. By the time I got to high school, particularly like my junior and senior year of high school, I was in this group called Teen Institute at my school at Wilson High School in Florence, South Carolina. Teen Institute was a drug prevention program. Our school actually had one of the biggest and largest drug prevention programs in the state of South Carolina. And Teen Institute basically encouraged kids to not only say no to drugs, but became kind of like the cool club for kids who didn't do drugs or anything like that. And we had a huge following, and we did like different workshops at different places around the state of South Carolina. And when we would quote unquote take our show on the road, we had a small group of about 10, maybe 10 to 15 of us. And there was this show that we would perform. And we would perform the show before we actually started our workshop, but we would be sitting in the audience as our mentor would be addressing the crowd. So we'd be in the crowd, and then we just start yelling, and people would look around, and then we would go into our show. Those performances, because we had rehearsed them and skits that we would do on stage, those were really, really dope. I still remember them line for line, every single one. Those I never got nervous for those, because you knew what you were gonna do. I think getting nervous wasn't like something that I would do. I would actually look forward to it. And then just before the performance would start, the adrenaline would rush through. And here's the thing, when you're performing and the lights are on, I always said this, the cool thing about performing and when the lights are on and it's showtime, you actually have the advantage. You know what you're supposed to say. You know what you're supposed to do. You know if you make a mistake. The audience doesn't. So that particularly bodes well for acting, public speaking, any type of performance outside of like an athletic performance. Now, as many of you know, I did play high school football. I played from all the way through high school into college. There were definitely nervous times. I would actually get butterflies before every game, even if it's a game that you know that, because I mean, when you're going to play against a team that you're going to smash and that you're going to blow off the field. I would still get butterflies because, like, the thing about me in football was that I love to perform, and it wasn't so much about the crowd, but I loved the level of competition. I loved lining up in front of someone and beating them. Not necessarily physically, because I'm not like the biggest of guys, and I definitely wasn't big in high school. But I enjoy the fact of just competing. I put my skills against your skills and let's see who wins. And I'm willing to bet if I put my skills on the line more than enough times, I'm going to win more than enough times. And it was just the confidence that I had in myself. And I played wide receiver. And in my mind, nobody could guard me. And so, like, even at this age of 51 at the time of this recording, nobody still can guard me. But I'm not getting on anybody's football field to run any routes. Like, I can assure you that. I'm way too old for that. But that's just the level of confidence that I had. The kids call it swag or whatever. I don't call it that. It was just confidence. I mean, like, I couldn't be stopped in my mind, at least. And I think when you have it in your mind, it transfers over to your performance, particularly if you put in the work. But honestly, no, I was always nervous. You're always nervous until the first hit, until the first bit of contact that you have, and then it feels like a regular game. But I'm always interested in, and because I love football and I love the game, I watch the game differently. I watch, particularly the bigger the game, you can tell who's nervous. You can see it sometimes in guys' eyes. Sometimes you can see it in their bodies. Sometimes people tend to tense up. It just depends. And you see it, especially on the college level, not just football, but I mean, like, I watch a lot of women's basketball. You can see who's nervous. If you come in the game, you shoot an air ball, you might be a little nervous. But after a while, after you bump into somebody or you get to the free throw line, then everything you realize that you're still on that stage, but you're not bothered by the lights, you're not bothered by the pressure or anything like that. Some people enjoy being in that comfort zone. That's their comfort zone, if you will. But yeah, I always had butterflies before a game. In college, it was a little different because I definitely had butterflies before every college football game. As many of you know, maybe you don't know, I played college football at South Carolina State University. As you see me point to my helmet, if you're watching on YouTube, thank you for watching. A couple of jerseys back here hanging up behind me. Yeah, there was always nervousness, excuse me. It didn't matter. You were always going to be nervous about what was going to happen because here's the thing, and I would say this all the time, and I live by this. Like, it's easy to be nervous about a game because you don't know the outcome, right? But if I had to do a presentation in my marketing class, I'm not nervous. Why would I be nervous? I know the outcome. I'm going to get up there. I'm going to do my presentation. I'm going to blow you away, and I'm going to get an A. And I felt like that about every single presentation that I did. Superbly confident in what I was talking about. Even if I had no clue as to what I was talking about, I made it sound as if I knew what I was talking about. I will say this, like, and I really truly believe this. like most podcasters are gifted with the innate ability to communicate to people. I think that's something that if you're good at what you do as far as podcasting, people relate. And when people relate, they tend to, gravitate towards you. And I don't think that you get nervous through something like that. So there was a time, even on this podcast, where in the early stages, I would be nervous when it was time to pod. Not now. I've done it for so many times, and it's kind of like riding a bike. I used to even get nervous sometimes when I would have guests on early, especially early in the podcast. Not now. I mean, like I said, I look forward to having people on. I look forward to sitting in front of a microphone, and speaking to you all. But nervous, no. But I did, as far as like presentations, I was a marketing major in college at South Carolina State University. And I'll be honest, I would actually surprise some of my classmates because, like, here's the thing. People had this thing, and maybe it was just the 90s. I don't know. People had this thing where I guess they assume because you play football that you don't know things or that maybe, you can't put a couple of sentences together. I don't know. That's not my issue. But what I will say is that I always look forward to my presentations, any type of thing where I had to do in front of my classmates. I always look forward to that. And I will say this as well. I always either wanted to go first or go last in all of my presentations. I never wanted to be in the middle, right? And there's a reason for that, because I feel like if I went first, then it's going to set the tone and the bar for everybody that comes behind me, right? And I had one professor in particular, Dr. Robinson. Shout out to Dr. Robinson. I know she's out there listening and watching. I think she was my marketing professor for a couple of my marketing classes. I remember distinctly this class that we took. It was called International Marketing. We had a presentation to do in front of the class, and I know specifically that she made me go first. She made me go first because she took volunteers. Of course, nobody volunteered to go first, but she made me go first because she said, and she told me this later, that she wanted me to kind of set the bar for where the presentations were going to be. And she didn't think that people would step their game up unless they had something to shoot for. And she said, basically, if you go up there and do what you're supposed to do, everybody else will follow suit. And I took that as a compliment. I didn't really want to go first, but I knocked it out the park. But more often than not, I wanted to go last. One in particular, because if you go last, then one, that's the lasting memory of people who see you or hear you talk. But also, your classmates would already have performed, and they said, well, okay, well, we were good, but we ain't touching him like that. So, in a lot of ways, this podcast, what this podcast ended up becoming, was birthed into those marketing classes, because those classes it was showtime for me. It was time to perform. We had to get up and do presentations, and public speaking was never an issue for me. It's funny because, like, my wife, she has to do a lot of speaking at her job, and she'll oftentimes tell me, like, I don't know what to say, or I don't know if this sounds right. I'm like, just flow, just talk, And she's like, no, I'm not like you. You like to talk. And I was like, I don't like to talk. I don't like to talk. But it's easy, and it's like it's something that I've just developed over time. But yeah, in a lot of ways, this podcast was birthed in those marketing classes at South Carolina State University, because that was one of the first places where I had a platform where I could talk and reach people, and they could give me their feedback. They could say what they liked, what they didn't like, which wasn't a lot. But I'd like to say the podcast was birthed there. But Showtime for me in the classroom was very key. And I never got nervous about that. Never. I look forward to those presentations that we would have in class. But speaking of podcasting, podcasting is in a lot of ways it's your performance. Excuse me. It's your performance each week, or however often you release episodes. Like I said, I'm never nervous. I'm always confident in what I'm talking about, and then I want to exude that confidence also into my guests. I've had guests on here who, before we started, they've admitted that they were very nervous, and I just remind them, like, hey, it's just the two of us talking, or the three of us talking, or the four of us talking, and I just remind them, like, yeah, there are a million people that are going to hear this, but it's okay. Only you know what you're saying, and there's not going to be anybody that's going to come behind you and critique every word that you've said. No, it doesn't like it's not like that. But for podcasting, all you have to do is just be confident, and when the lights come on, literally and figuratively, be ready. I think if you're confident and if you're ready, you'll be fine. I'm a firm believer in that, but more than anything else, I believe in Kyle. I've always believed in Kyle, and I believe in Kyle when nobody else will. And that's not too often, but and I think, going back to my story earlier, I think that's probably where it came for Skylar. She believes in Skylar, and she's got a mom and dad and 3 older brothers who really believe in her too. So, even watching her now, she's into different things. She's a cheerleader at her middle school, so she just cheered for football season, and now at the time of this recording, it's basketball season, and she's cheering there. And she also plays tennis. She was playing the piano for it at some point in time, but she stopped. But she's very, very talented. All of my kids are. But she is like, when the lights come on and it's showtime, she's ready. And I think that's very impressive because, again, it's not something that I think we've taught her. She just has it in her. And the thing I always say, and I'll close with this, is that, always be confident in what you do. Whether or not you have a podcast, or you're doing a presentation at work, or you're performing in front of, hundreds of thousands of people. Just always understand that somebody's always watching and listening to you. And you don't necessarily have to have a platform for people to do that. And if they're watching and they're listening, just give them something to watch and listen to. Be you, because they're always watching and listening, even when you think they aren't. Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for me. This has been another edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast. The podcast drops every Thursday and every Sunday at midnight. If you're on social media, hit us up. 12 Kyle podcast across the board, Twitter X, Blue Sky. We are now on Blue Sky. Where else? Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and the TikTok. We are there as well. We have a YouTube channel. If you're on YouTube, you can watch all of our episodes on YouTube. You can also listen on YouTube. We have both video and audio. Just go to YouTube, 12 Kyle podcast, and check us out there. Subscribe, hit the notification button so that you will get notifications when these episodes drop. Pretty soon we will be dropping some YouTube exclusives, so be on the lookout for that. Also, if you'd like to contribute to the podcast financially, hit us up on Cash App, $TWELVEKYLE. And also, there's a link in the description box. Click that. You can buy 12 Kyle podcast t-shirts, hoodies, and coffee mugs for the low, low price. And last but not least, as many of you know, maybe you don't know, we have a new baby. It is called the Rap Soul Podcast. You can find the podcast wherever you find this podcast, on YouTube as well. Rap Soul Podcast is the intersection between the 80s, 90s, and 2000s when it comes to rap, soul, hip hop, and R&B music. It is the best music podcast that you've never heard. So check it out. Again, that's going to do it for me. I am your boy, 12 Kyle. We'll catch you guys next time. 5,000. Chill.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of the 12 Kyle podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure that you hit the subscribe button and share this podcast with a friend who needs the 12 Kyle podcast in their life. Every listen, every download, and every share helps us grow. Thanks for being a part of the 12 Kyle podcast community. We appreciate your support. We will catch you next time. 5,000.